All right, I've got two examples that are going to sort of put together everything you've learned so far in this module, in particular if-then statements combined with for loops. We've got an example here: create a VBA sub that's going to delete all the negative 999s and negative 998s in a column of data. So let me explain the utility of this. Here is a massive spreadsheet I was able to download off the NOAA website, where we have the year, so 2002, we have the month and the date, and for each of these days we have a high temperature for that day, a low temperature. This is the precipitation, this is the amount of snow, and this is the snow that's on the ground on that day. But unfortunately, sometimes instruments aren't working, and in that case they usually output something like a 9999 or a negative 9999 or a negative 999, or here they're also using negative 998s, which means that that data is not available, that the instrument was not working. Now, if you want to do something like you want to plot this data, or you wanted to take the average, then obviously these very large negative numbers are going to affect the averages, and it's going to screw up your plots and everything. Rather than going through, I think there's something like 48,000 rows here, rather than going through each one and searching manually for these, you can create a subroutine that's going to go through and replace those negative 998s or negative 999s with just a blank. So that's what we want to do, is we want to just make a subroutine that's going to go through a column in this case, and it's going to delete those and just leave them empty. As always, let's make a flowchart. We count the number of rows. We're going to set up a for loop. We're going to iterate through all the cells. We're going to, for each cell, and again, I'm denote selection.cells i,1 as just cell i,1 to save space. If that cell value is equal to negative 999 or negative 998, we're going to replace that cell with just empty quotations. If it's false, then we're not going to do anything, and we're going to loop back and increment I by 1. When I exceeds the number of rows, we're done, and that's it. There's nothing to output, because what we're doing here is we're making modifications to the individual cells. We're not actually outputting anything at the end. So we just end. I've named my sub delete 999. We dim the two variables we're working with. We just have I and the number of rows, which is nr. We determine the number of rows using selection.rows.count. We set up our single for loop, where we're doing a fixed iteration from the first row to the number of rows. We set up our one-way if-then. If selection.cells i,1 equals negative 998 or selection.cells i,j equals negative 999, then we're just going to say the new value in that selection is just empty, just blank. So this is it. Now we can run this on our selection. We start with a selection. I'm going to just run through this using F8. We count the number of rows. We have 14. The first one is a 6.7, so we keep going and going. The first negative 999 is when I equals 5, so you notice when I equals 5, we go into the true arm of that one-way if-then, and we're going to replace with just a blank. And we can keep going and going. And the next one, that was a negative 998, was encountered when I equals 9, and we keep going and we finish. So that's a example of where we might want to implement what we've learned already in this course. We have a selection going on inside of a fixed for loop. I wanted to also point out there's another way to do this. Instead of using selection, we have to start with a selection because we're counting the number of rows up here, but we can use, instead of using selection.cells i,1, we can use the active cell. So the active cell right now is D1. It's the first one by default. If active cell equals negative 998 or active cell equals negative 999, then active cell.clear. Now we have to offset, we have to change the active cell after each iteration, after the one-way if-then statement. We can do that using active cell offset 1 row 0 columns dot select. So let's go through, make sure you have the selection here. We go through, we count the number of rows. If the active cell, right now the active cell is D1, that's not equal to a negative number. Neither is the second, and you notice here at the end of each iteration we offset the active cell by 1 row and 0 columns. So we move to the next and we check that, and we check the next one. Now this one, because it's a negative 999, ActiveCell.clear. And we keep going and going. We have another one here. We just clear it and we keep going. So that's another way that you can delete the contents that satisfy a particular constraint.